Support for WUWM podcast comes from Life Navigators, your disability partner, offering disability services for over 75 years. More on their family resources at lifenavigators.org or their helpline, 414-774-6255.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Excaret Nunez. Today we'll share some of our favorite conversations we've had with filmmakers during the Milwaukee Film Festival. We'll learn about a film centered on a group of young people trying to hold adults accountable for climate change solutions.
This is a future they're going to have to live in, an ocean's full of plastic or pollution in the air, destruction of wildlife. That's a world they're going to inhabit, and they just can't understand why we're not acting faster than how we are.
Plus, we'll speak with the filmmaker of The Big Cheese, which looks at what it takes to be a cheesemonger.
Cheesemongers need to have an encyclopedia knowledge of cheese. They need to have a very refined palate. They need to actually not just know cheese, but know wine, know beer, know how to cook.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Excaret Nunez. Thanks for joining us today. Since the dawn of the internet, the endless online spaces have been rapidly changing and taking up more of our time. Social media and apps are shaping how young people think and feel. A new documentary, Your Attention Please, highlights the real-world consequences of social media. It also shows how a new generation of parents and teens are fighting back against big tech's agenda to keep us scrolling. The film is showing at the Milwaukee Film Festival. To learn more, Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski is joined by director Sarah Robin, writer and co-creator Jack LeMay, and film participant Kristen Bride. A warning to our listeners, this conversation does include the topic of suicide.
So Sarah, we'll start with you. With so many potential directions a film about tech can use and take, can you share how your vision and focus for the documentary came together?
Yes, for sure. And it was a tricky thing because it is a very large subject, as you say. So whittling it down was not an easy task. But what was really important to me from the start and to the whole team was that we create something that inspires action and it gives people hope. This is not another doomsday tech doc. This is a hopeful film. And even though it does wrestle with some very dark and difficult topics and it takes an honest look at the scale of the problem that we're facing, it, importantly looks at people who are actively working towards solutions and offers viewers a whole range of solutions of how we can approach this. So that was kind of the organizing thought around it. How do we make something emotionally impactful that gets the solutions across and gets people excited to become involved?
And to kind of go into the dark territory you got to lay down to explain the impact, tech was supposed to be this great equalizer of sorts, but what are its true impacts, especially for teenagers, both when it comes to education and their personal lives?
Yeah, what we've been seeing is that because technology right now is designed to keep us on the devices as long as possible, the business model, right, is engagement-based. So the longer we're on these devices, the more money these companies make. That disrupts a whole plethora of healthy, normal functioning, and I think it's particularly visible when it comes to young people. So anything from ability to focus, ability to socialize, to connect with people, stable sense of self, self-confidence, trust, trusting relationships with friends, all of that has been impacted by technology in ways that are often very invisible, and I think it took, over a decade for us to wrestle with this and get to a place where we now have scientific evidence that actually shows the links to social media. And so we've seen really a youth mental health crisis that in a lot of ways it's not reducible to just technology, but in a lot of ways it is connected with technology and with just how much time young people spend on social media and on phones.
Right, because we can kind of feel the soft impact, like just as people interacting with this. But Jack, I'm wondering if you can speak to this about all the deep dive and research it takes to quantify that, especially when presenting it in a documentary so it's clearly laid out for people about the impacts.
Yeah, I think that this experience was for us like a crash course in a survey and what this has done to humanity at large. We spoke to Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, who gave us a lot of hard data about teen usage of social media over 3 to 5 hours and how that doubles risk of mental health issues. We sort of tried to balance the film between these two worlds of looking at the quantitative effect because data is impactful and people want to understand it scientifically, but also we're not really going to push this needle forward unless we look at the subjective experience. What is this doing to real families, real people? What is the cost? And I think that's where the powerful story of Kristen Bride really is the emotional center and heart of the film.
Kristen, to bring you in, you're joining us via Zoom today for listeners. You're a participant in the documentary Your Attention Please with the stark title of Parent Survivor. You lost your son, Carson, to suicide due to online harassment. But before we get into that and everything that's happened since, I'm hoping you can start us off by just sharing more about your son.
Sure. Carson is my youngest son. He was the shining light in our family, very high energy, great sense of humor, made everyone laugh, started to get into acting and was really talented. And as a result of losing him, we have a very big hole in our family and in our hearts.
With the doc and kind of framing your story, Carson's story, and a lot of families that joined you in your efforts, it starts with phone use. So you got a cell phone for Carson in 8th grade, right? That was the first time. How did things start changing after he got his phone?
Well, he was the last kid in his class to get an iPhone. It was a really old hand-me-down, no apps on it. And we had really hoped that he could stay away from the apps. But by the time he got to 10th grade, he was telling us that that is the way all the kids are connecting is over Snapchat, and I feel left out. And so we allowed him to have Snapchat in 10th grade, and he did not make it to 11th grade.
Can you share a bit more about things you discovered after Carson's death? I think a lot of people listening, especially parents, cannot imagine an unimaginable situation, but it does happen to a lot of families, and how you managed to take your grief and use it for action.
Well, what we learned, because there were no signs that he was suicidal. In fact, he wrote his upcoming work schedule on the kitchen calendar the night before, and we celebrated his first real job. And in the past, Carson had told me about bullying incidents at school, but he did not talk about the cyberbullying that was happening to him online. And I learned after his death that this is very common. Kids don't want to have their device taken away because they're so addicted to it or they're afraid of being a snitch. And so he kept it all to himself, and he received 2 weeks of really harassing messages over an anonymous app that had been integrated into Snapchat. So we knew he had Snapchat and we were checking his phone. We did not know that Snapchat had allowed this anonymous app, YOLO, into their platform. And when you have anonymous apps, if you look at the history of these apps, when you give kids the ability to be anonymous and post messages about others, you can only imagine what that does in the teen world in creating drama. And this particular app had promised kids that they would monitor for cyberbullying and reveal the names of those who do so and ban them from the app. Yet the last search on Carson's phone was for hacks to find out who was doing this to him. We later learned that the company only had one employee. The app went viral because of the cyberbullying that it facilitated. And they really had no way of identifying cyberbullies, or were they even monitoring it? And I found that out the hard way by reaching out to them after Carson's death. And I was completely ignored.
Yeah, I do want to talk about this. This is not just a YOLO app problem. It's with a lot of social media platforms. How did you find out what was, quote unquote, accountable versus not? Like, what is liability, what is not when it comes to all these social media platforms?
Well, we ended up actually suing YOLO, and we did win that court case for product misrepresentation, which is what it was. But you're right that this is not something that is just pertains to YOLO. I work with so many other survivor parents who have reported things online to other big platforms like Snapchat and the Meta platforms, only to be ignored or being told that it meets community guidelines when it definitely does not. And that's really part of the business model. They want to keep kids online longer so that they can extract their data and then sell it to advertisers. And what better way to do that by causing intentional drama online that keeps kids hooked? Because if you're not being bullied, you want to see what the other kids are saying or want to make sure that they don't target you next.
And now there's a long story that is ongoing, but a key part of this documentary is, Kristen, your efforts along with other parents and groups to advocate for the Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA. So, Sarah, we'll start with you, and just thinking about logistics and the long game of a documentary. When did KOSA and this storyline kind of incorporate itself, or was this a starting point for you?
So the starting point initially was telling Kristen's story of what had happened to her. And then that naturally led to, okay, what is she doing now? And the lawsuit at the time, it's so slow moving that it's a little challenging. It can be done, but I knew with the film that I wanted to have it done in 2 to 3 years because I could feel that the subject matter was getting more and more important. And I thought and tech moves so fast, so I just thought we don't have that much time. So I was like, I need something that happens a little faster than the lawsuit to be kind of our narrative thread. And the push for KOSA just naturally became that as, momentum was gained around that. And then when we had, that historic vote in the Senate, with this overwhelming bipartisan support for the bill, we really thought, wow, this is happening. And for quite some time in making the film, we were like, this is going to be a really good news, happy movie. And in some ways it still is, but it also has some really heartbreaking moments in it now.
Now, Sarah, as you mentioned at the top, it's not a doomsday. There is hope in this. And I'm hoping all of you can share where you found the hope and what you highlighted to show here's the alternate to what's happening.
Yeah, I think to me, hope is seeing in how many areas people are active and taking risks and taking initiative and putting themselves on the line to push this forward and to really invite us to question what has our relationship with technology become and how do we want it to be reshaped? How do we want it to be different? Right now we have a model that's a very extractive model, right? It takes our attention, it takes our time, it generates money for a few powerful companies. And yet technology can be so beautiful and can do so much. And I think even in its quite broken form, social media still can help us connect. It certainly helped us connect with people who are now in the film. How can we capture that initial idealistic vision of technology and bring that back? And turn it into something that actually helps us connect and helps us be better, helps us solve these quite massive problems that we're up against as a society. I really do believe technology can be that force for good, and there's more of a desire now to bring that about, which gives me a huge amount of hope.
Jack, could you share a couple of the examples that are in the film?
Absolutely. One really striking example is we went to Brockton High School in Massachusetts, and they had just implemented about 6 months prior their first phone-free policy. So the year before, kids were used to sort of having phones in the classroom, texting all day, sending Snapchats around, and now it was cold turkey. They went back to the way we used to do it, right? And that was a pretty shocking thing for them. So it was actually a really entertaining day in a lot of ways because we got to see a lot of them go, yeah, I was not having that. I was not looking forward to go to school. That was tough. What they found over the next year is that they actually really enjoyed what they found on the other side of that experiment. The phone in a lot of ways can get in between that relationship you have with yourself and with others. So I think, I found hope in Brockton High School. I found hope in looking at the offline club in Amsterdam. And Trisha Prabhu, one of our subjects, was cyberbullied, and she really turned that experience into a desire to figure out how to design social media differently and create these nudges that would encourage users to remember there's like a real person on the other end. Really, the film for us was an experience to see all these different people come together and show how, in all these different ways, we all fit into this puzzle together. And really, we are resilient, and human beings will be able to thrive again when this stuff is taken away or changed to be more positive.
For you, Kristen, and especially being so embedded in this work, what continues to give you hope and the motivation to keep going with this work, even if it reminds you of the big hole in your life?
early on, I had to make a decision. Am I going to rip the Band-Aid off and go public with this and try to save other families from this horrible tragedy, or just lay in bed and cry all day? And I chose to go forward and become an advocate. I've never regretted it. When I first started 6 years ago, I felt completely alone. I didn't feel like people were talking about these harms so much. And now, almost 6 years later, we just have such a strong group of survivor parents who have lost their kids to so many different harms. And I feel like even with non-survivor parents, we are creating a movement for change, and everyone can do their part to make a change in their life to reclaim their humanity.
Sarah Robin is the director, and Jack LeMay is the writer and co-creator of Your Attention Please. We also heard from Kristen Bride, a participant in the documentary. They spoke with Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski. A group of kids from around the world packed into a biofueled school bus for a trip across Europe. But this wasn't just for sightseeing. The 8 children on this bus were chosen out of thousands who applied, and all of them care deeply about climate change and have some ideas of what to do about it. The bus journey was captured by Australian-based filmmaker Damon Gamau for his documentary called Future Council. It's showing at the Milwaukee Film Festival, and ahead of that, Gamau joins WUWM environmental reporter Susan Bentz to talk about the film and the Future Council.
The children were from 8 different countries and quite dispersed around the world, Europe and Asia. 2 children that we initially had that were from Africa, but as is the state of the world right now, we couldn't get them visas to film in Europe, which was incredibly disappointing. But a couple of the children, for example, one is a young boy from Bali in Indonesia, and he's only 11, but he's been very concerned about the state of the plastics in his waterways and in the river systems there. So he set up a company called Joseph's Recycling, where he collects plastics and turns them into useful household items. And he's got about 100 different clients that he collects from. But then he uses the money that he raises to put children through school. There's lots of uneducated children in Indonesia that for various reasons. And so he's put a whole lot of children through school already. And now, 2 years on, he's building a health clinic in school where children can pay with plastic instead of money. So this level of entrepreneurial spirit, but also regeneration, is just embedded in him. And it's the same with all the children. There's no artifice with them. It's very authentic. They're not doing it for any other reasons other than they genuinely care. And they were the 8 children in particular we cast. So all of them had their own unique superpower in different ways. One was sort of an activist from Wales, whose town, Fairborn, is the first to sort of be inundated by floodwaters of the Western world. And so they're all going to have to move out of their village in the next 20 years or so. There's another young girl from Edinburgh who does her own plastic beach cleanups every Sunday morning. There's Ruby from Australia, and she uses her creativity and her singing to write music to sort of create that emotional depth. So all of them brought something very unique to the film.
Incredible. So along your bus trip and your sustainable bus, so you would have conversations with the kids in different scenes, and then you would turn on the camera, or how did you, I don't mean make the moments happen, but how did you capture the moments?
Well, I think anyone that's made a documentary or made a film understands there's an enormous amount of trust, and particularly with documentaries, the more you try and fabricate or control, it loses the magic and the essence of what a documentary is, which is something very spontaneous and fresh and real. And I think audiences sniff if it's inauthentic. So children in particular have such a freshness in the moment. So really every scene in the film is never a second take. We had multiple cameras, sort of 3 or 4 at any given time in strategic locations or hidden in the bus, and really just tried to capture their first responses. So I provoke a conversation, or like throwing a little pebble in the pond and see what happens. And I really think that's the strength of the film, that everything you see is genuine in a first take and very spontaneous. And because we cast it, I think correctly, they just their insights, the depth of their understanding, their emotion. That was the thing that really struck me. It was such a delight to travel with them across Europe and explore all their range of emotions.
So you marched your team into corporate conference rooms. How did you pull that off? And again, were those situations where you turned on the camera and it just happened?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, there was a lot of to and froing to make those
Right.
events happen. And you know, even though they were challenging, I do have to tip my hat to all of those companies that did allow the children to come in, because a lot of companies just, said absolutely no way. We know we aren't doing enough. We know we're not ready, and the last thing we want to do is be called out by a group of smart kids. So, the ones that did say yes, I have to credit. But I think even they were, as you can see in the film, were, as many adults are, were caught off guard by that acumen I talked about, that some of these children really know their stuff. And I remember going into ING, and one of the girls from Singapore, who's only 13, Orby, she'd read their entire climate risk assessment report from 2023. It was like a 60-page document that I don't think even the CEO had read. And so she starts saying, on page 43, you referred to this. And he just, was a little bit flummoxed because, these kids care. And so that was fascinating to watch, and just the depth of their understanding or their insights. And I think the humanity of their questions. So many of these CEOs inadvertently put on a mask because that's how they have to function. And we all focus on exponential growth and pleasing the shareholders, and the humanity kind of gets eviscerated. So there's something about just having children in the room that is a superpower. They don't have to do much. They just hold a moral barometer for these people who suddenly think about their own children or their own grandchildren in a way that they don't when they're just in that corporate veneer.
As the film begins, you state very creatively the fact that we are nature. And I've heard another talk that you gave, and you talked about wanting to nurture saplings. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, well, I guess as you know, we've just completely disconnected ourselves from the living world, and it's not embedded in our economy. It's not embedded in our design thinking. We've built a whole civilization on a belief or a story that we're separate and superior to nature. So you see it manifest everywhere. And I think the only way we've got any sort of chance to correct what we've done is to actually embed nature back in and use nature design thinking, biomimicry, whatever you want to call it. And so I really wanted that to be a key element of the children's understanding, that emissions or plastics in the ocean or the destruction of forests aren't separate issues. They are the flawed architecture of the system that we've designed. So there's a sort of a fairy tale that weaves through the film about this mythical creature called Groth. And Groth is sort of represents the economic system that's sort of outgrown its own nest. It started with all the best intentions, and we've shared goods and exchanged things around the world. But now it's got to a point where it's just doing damage. And Groth stands for growth without the W, and the W is for wisdom. So I really wanted to get across to the children that we've been growing without wisdom. So how do we incorporate wisdom back into this growth model so we can consider nature, we can value human beings again, we can look at more equitable distribution of all the beautiful things that humans create? That really is the only way we're going to get through this. We can't tinker around the edges and think that renewables are going to save everything, because if we're still using, renewable energy to plunder and extract the planet, then what's the point? We have to really systemically rethink. And I think if we can get that education embedded into our younger generation, which is to come full circle, this idea of the saplings, is that how do we nurture these new seedlings that are coming through the soil and protect them and ring fence them from all the chaos that's around them, so that they do have a chance of growing into these robust, strong, empathetic leaders of a mighty new forest of the future. And that's really the whole idea of the Future Council, not just the film, but now a movement that's spread right around the world, where children from everywhere are now signing up to join. They chat with each other. We give them the right experts to hear from. There's design models now where they can actually think about designing a better space in their community, something in their school, a product that they think will help the future. And we really help them to select those ideas, scale them, get them government grants, get them impact funding, get them design awards, so that they can have real world outcomes and actually feel like they're contributing to a better future, rather than this sort of perfunctory or token, aren't you cute? Aren't kids, don't they have a lovely idea?
Right.
We're beyond that. Kids
Right.
know their stuff, and let's try and empower them properly.
So Future Council is not only a documentary, it's an organization. When did that seed germinate? I mean, did you know from the beginning you wanted that to be one of the products of this work?
Look, I wasn't sure. There was definitely a sense, given how many children had expressed interest and how clever they were, it definitely felt like, there's an opportunity to connect these young people and give them a voice in some capacity. And it was probably halfway through the film. It's actually 2/3 in. There's one of the young girls says, we know there are other children like us around the world in classrooms everywhere, but there's no outlet for them to express or contribute their ideas. Can we set up some kind of real life future council? So we then spent a year just looking at how that would work, collaborating with the children in the film and also an advisory group of other young people. And so we've landed on a not-for-profit. We've got a youth CEO. We've got 12 strong children from 14 to 20 from all around the world that help with the decision making, which companies we work with, and it's all sort of starting to kick off. And we're just about to release the film right across Europe, the BBC, multiple countries, and North America. So really, we're hoping that thousands of children are going to sign up once they've seen the film, and then we can really become quite a potent force for change.
Damon Gamau is the filmmaker of the documentary Future Council. He spoke with WUWM's environmental reporter, Susan Bentz. Later in the show, we'll meet a cheese expert, known as a cheese monger, to learn about what they do. But first, we'll tell you about the film Powwow People, which explores the experience of attending and participating in a powwow. That's coming up on Lake Effect, on Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Excaret Nunez. A documentary showing at the Milwaukee Film Festival explores the cultural and physical experiences of a powwow. Powwow People is a documentary film by Sky Hopinka, a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation. This documentary focuses on how a 3-day powwow unfolds through music, dance, and relationships. WUWM's Eric Vaughnfellow Maria Peralta Ariano is joined by Hopinka to learn more about the evolving nature of powwows.
For you, what is the place of the powwow in your life? What do you enjoy about them, and why are they special for you?
Powwows have long been a consistent part of my life. I mean, I first started dancing when I was 4 years old as a tiny tot. It's something that my family did and my parents both did, and yeah, it's something that I could always return to even when I didn't dance for an extended period of time. Powwows are always places where I feel like, I don't know, some of the stresses you don't realize that you're carrying kind of wash away. Just being around Native people, like wherever that is across the country. What I love about them so much is just how adaptable they are to whatever community is hosting them. There's thousands that happen across the country, all summer, all fall, all year round, basically, and each one is different. There's certain consistencies around it, but really what they offer is just a place for Native people to gather and as a sort of refuge, but also just as a celebration and also just as a continuing way of life of powwow people living on the powwow trail.
I think that's one of the things that I also really deeply appreciate, is that no matter where you go, like you said, there are some core things that don't change, but it also has like different flares from the tribes that are hosting the powwow and things like that, and that's what makes it special. But also, there's a lot of different ways that Indigenous people, Indigenous communities kind of show up in contemporary culture, and even how they're showing up in their own communities in contemporary ways. So why did you choose the powwow to showcase as the focal point for this documentary versus, say, another social gathering? I
mean, I probably simply because it's what I grew up with and what I know. And when I very first got into filmmaking, one thing that I was always thinking about was making a powwow film. I just think that there's something beautiful about them, there's something cinematic about them, and there's something too about that relationship of spectacle. There's something about the relationship of visitors and guests and spectators coming, and this idea of performance. So like they're very performative place and space, and I think that, or I felt like it would have lent itself well to a piece that is grounded in cinema and storytelling. And like even like with the idea of the film itself, you know, it isn't necessarily to explain what powwows are or to teach the history of powwows, but rather to, I don't know, like show my relationship or just show one way of engaging with them as someone that's participating, as someone that's there. And yeah, just this act of attention and looking and also bearing witness, but then also just, you know, bearing witness to these dancers and these drummers in the ways that they want to be seen.
Absolutely. I think that was another aspect that I did appreciate, was that oftentimes when Indigenous cultures do come onto our screens or on the big screen, there's always this sort of need to explain and inform at the same time as entertain. But this purely just puts a powwow in a place of appreciation. And like you said, there is aspects of performance and spectacle. But I didn't feel like the documentary was holding my hand and telling me exactly what this is and what this means. One of the few points of narration in the documentary, the point is made that there is a certain type of person that it takes to be a powwow person. You have people who go and visit, and then there are true diehard people who are powwow people. So can you just kind of explain what that means? What does that take to live that kind of lifestyle?
Yeah, there's a lot of different layers, and I mean, it's just the different ways of being a powwow person. Freddie Kozad, who was speaking to that in the film, he was like talking about like the hardcore powwow person that travels basically like 11 months out of the year from powwow to powwow to powwow, and it's just like their way of life. And like, you know, you have like some people that just like travel during the summer or like when work allows or when school allows. But I think that just the ways that it varies speaks to, again, just like how adaptable and malleable it is to fit the needs of the people participating. There's all kinds of powwow people, and each one of them gives shape and texture to the beautiful fabric that is powwows and powwow culture. I think that as long as you're powwowing and you're showing up and dancing and spectating or vending or selling food or just like participating however you can, I think that, you know, that speaks to the broadness of what it means to powwow and to be a powwow person.
I like how you brought up just generally there's a bunch of different people that come together to make powwows a powwow, and just generally what it is. And in this documentary, we follow several people. Of course, we have our master of ceremonies. We have Freddie Kozak's drum group. We follow a dancer by the name of Jamie John, who identifies as Two-Spirit. They are non-gender conforming dancer, and it kind of lends itself to that theme of adaptability and changing. How did you find these people? Why did you want to kind of focus on them in the documentary and the things that they had to say about powwows and lifestyle?
Jamie John was one of the first people that I talked to. I met them through Adam Perrone, who was one of the producers on the project, but who also is the director of the Sundance Indigenous program. And he knew Jamie John through that, and he introduced us. And it was just really, I don't know, it was really nice and fun to talk to Jamie, because they're thinking so much about these things in such a deep and introspective way that isn't just about the present, but thinking about the future. And they really put into words some things that I was thinking about or wondering about or just couldn't quite articulate. And I think that they serve as a wonderful counterpoint, or just, not counterpoint, but I think just, you know, addition to Freddie, who's also like speaking about the past, you know, like not so much like a nostalgic, mournful way, but just the way that, you know, is about like, these are the things that happened and we need to remember them. Through the small anecdotes that they tell, and through the way that, Freddie is speaking about death and people passing. So, like, for me, like, Ruben is very much grounded in the presence of the powwow. Gina is offering the sort of, like, you know, idea of, like, guiding someone through the space as she does, and Freddie is speaking to the past and Jamie's speaking to the future. So, like, the four of them, they kind of, like, triangulates or quadrangulates sort of, like, different ideas around understanding this place and participating.
Was the main theme of, like, change and adaptation that I found throughout the documentary, was that on purpose, or did that just kind of emerge as you guys were filming?
I mean, it kind of emerged. I mean, I think it emerged, well, like Jamie Lee was the first interview that I did, and, you know, like when they were talking about the idea of change and how that kind of like near the end of the film comes in, you know, going through the interviews, it just seemed like, yeah, like this is the thing that is really important to understand about POWs as well. It's like they're always changing, they're always evolving, and like not only, you know, across region, but also across time. You know, in the last like 50, 60 years they've changed, in the last 100 years they've changed. Heck, even the last 10 years they've changed. And I think that's a really good thing because, as Jamie mentions in the film, this idea of traditional should always be questioned. You know, what are we bringing with us, and what do we want to, and what should we leave behind? Yeah, I like with everything. Like there's you know, high tide, low tide, it ebbs and flows, and I don't know. Again, I think that is just a reflection of where people are at and like what they're thinking about, what their concerns are as Native people across the country.
Some of those concerns did play a part into your planning of the documentary. From what I understand, you and your team decided to set up your guys' own powwow to be able to film at versus going to another community's powwow to go and film at. What went into that decision, and what work went into actually forming a powwow and then filming and miking that?
Yeah, I mean, it was always like an idea to film our own powwow, but like we also like, you know, explored the idea of like, do we want to go to different communities? Like, do we want to go to 4 or 5 different powwows across the country to kind of like get an idea of the breadth of the different types of powwows there are? But ultimately, just like what made the most sense and like in the truest spirit of the film and the filmmaking process was just hosting our own powwow and making sure that, you know, people could, you know, self-select whether they wanted to participate or not and be on camera or not. And like all throughout the powwow too, just like we're making sure to announce that this is filmed, just because, you know, like there's such a long history of extraction in Native communities of images and imagery of Native peoples, often without permission or consent. So it is a way for us to let everyone know that this was a powwow that is going to be on a film, and if you want to be in the film, you can come, and if you don't, then you don't have to.
When I first watched the documentary, I thought it was such an interesting way to film it. In addition to like very light narration and just thoughts coming in naturally from the people that we are following. Why did you choose to film it in that way?
I think it was initially too like this resistance to make a story out of it, you know? Like it's not, I don't know, I didn't want to have a film where we're just like, is this person gonna get this in the end? Or are they gonna do this at the end? Like I said, like there's just a certain aspect of powwows where it's just like they happen every weekend, and sometimes they're boring, sometimes like they're exciting, sometimes like you're just like killing time and you're just like waiting for something to happen. Sometimes like you're just like caught up in the moment and it's over like that or whatever. And I don't know, it's just like I didn't want to, I don't know, again, I just like wanted to have these different textures of voices come in where it also wasn't trying to give them the authoritative like talking head documentary treatments, you know, like these are the experts and this is the history lesson you're going to get and this is what this means and this means and this means. Rather, I wanted to make a film that was like what it feels like to be at a powwow. And like sometimes it is like that. Sometimes like you have conversations with people you never see again, and sometimes you see the same people over and over and over again. And also too, it's just like I like the sort of voiceover technique because it just feels a little bit like you're watching something, but you're also listening to someone talk to you. And also it kind of can be a little bit more open too, just like giving people different ways in of seeing themselves in these different places and spaces.
Sky Hopenka is the filmmaker of Powwow People. He spoke with WUWM Eric Vonfellow, Maria Peralta Ariano. Do you need some flexibility for when you listen to Lake Effect? Well, you can listen to us on demand. Find Lake Effect as a podcast wherever you like to listen, download it, and enjoy on the go. They're the sommeliers of cheese. We'll learn what it takes to be a cheesemonger and participate in a competition known as the Olympics of Cheesemongering. That's next on Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Excurret Nunez. If you're into cheese, there's a documentary for you at the Milwaukee Film Festival, aptly called The Big Cheese. The film whisks you into the world of international cheesemongering. Cheesemongers are like sommeliers, but for cheese. The film focuses on a New Yorker, Adam Moskowitz, who's on a mission to help the first American speak, sniff, and taste their way to a first-place finish at a prestigious competition in France known as the Olympics of Cheesemongering. WUWM's Mayan Silver sat down with Moskowitz, along with the documentary's filmmaker, Sarah Jo Wolanski, to talk about all things cheese.
In the film, a cheesemonger is defined as like a sommelier, but more punk rock. Can you explain, the basics of the cheesemongering profession for those who don't know? And even to get to the very basic, how is it different than a cheesemaker?
Really, really, really simple way to explain it. Cheesemaker makes cheese. A cheesemonger cuts and sells you cheese. So a cheesemaker makes cheese. A cheesemonger sells you cheese. Cheesemongers can be found at what we call cut-to-order cheese shops. So any place where you could actually talk to somebody and be like, can I try that cheese? What's that cheese made of? What's the smell of that cheese? Where'd that cheese come from? The person on the counter that's answering those questions, giving you samples and cutting you cheese to go home with, that's a cheesemonger, a merchant of cheese.
Nice. And this film shows how in places like Europe, cheesemongering is really a valued, prestigious career. And in America, it often means working minimum wage at a grocery counter. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's centuries of tradition in Europe, especially regarding cheese and cheese consumption and cheese making and cheesemongering. It's an essential part of the diet, and it's something that's heralded. Here in America, not so much. We're a young country, and then an even younger dairy culture. And we're a country that grew up eating string cheese, Kraft singles, and Havarti. cheese that when you ask somebody what it tastes like, they go creamy.
Okay, so Adam, you started the Cheesemonger Invitational Masters competition in the U.S. as a precursor for Americans to get into the Mondial du Fromage in France. Someone in the film described it as WrestleMania compared to the Mondial's Olympics. Of course, you're a coach at the Mondial de Fromage. Like you were talking about, there's a written test about cheese. Competitors have to cut a perfect 250-gram piece of cheese. There's a blind taste test. You've got to identify stuff like country of origin and age. There's oral presentations. Can you describe the rigorousness of getting people prepared for this?
Hours upon hours upon hours of preparation. First and foremost, the written test is a master's level exam. So you have to be an expert in dairy breeds, cheese making, cheese affinage, history. For the taste test, the glossary of cheese is PDO. So we're talking hundreds of different cheeses that it might be, and then more difficult, the cheese, the way it tastes, let's say on the west coast of America, is different than how it might taste in the center of France. The Group 3 challenges are where the real rigor occurs, because it's a composed cheese plate, a cheese prep, a cheese transformation, a cheese plateau, and a cheese sculpture. I personally met with the team a minimum of once a week for hours. But they themselves likely, if I was to guess, put in between 10 and 20 hours per week for months leading up to this event.
Wow, that is overwhelming just to think about it. I mean, I don't know if even you took the 6 most popular cheeses and gave me them to taste, if I'd be able to identify them properly. I mean, I love cheese, but...
Yeah, I mean, they're an encyclopedia. Cheesemongers need to have an encyclopedia knowledge of cheese. They need to have a very refined palate. They need to actually not just know cheese, but know wine, know beer, know how to cook, because as a cheesemonger, you're asked questions like, what melts well? What would go good with this? What should I serve this with? And so you have to be kind of like a chef. You also kind of have to be a mind reader because everybody loves cheese, but so few people actually are comfortable talking about cheese. The skill set of a cheesemonger is varied, wide, and way more difficult than I think people might realize.
Definitely. So Sarah Jo, there are a lot of highlights to how this film was shot. I need to ask you about those gorgeous close-ups of cheese throughout the film from beginning to end. How did you kind of make cheese another character in this documentary?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, credit to that goes to their cinematographer, Gareth Smith. But, we kind of, we were discussing and we're like, yeah, the cheese exactly needs to be a character in this film. How can we kind of highlight it? And honestly, what's even been done throughout history and throughout art to highlight the cheese. So actually, Gareth pulled a bunch of Flemish still life paintings where cheese had been featured, and we were kind of looking at the way the artist had treated the lighting in those paintings, and that was actually an inspiration for how we put together all those close-ups of cheese. So yeah, every single one of those little close-up shots, by the way, is a lot of work. They were all put together, each composition. We had a production designer, Lyndon Elstrin. We had one of the cheesemongers featured in the film, Alex Armstrong, cutting cheese in a beautiful way for it. And, those shots are so hard because they're so close up and so detailed that you would never believe how hard it is to, make something look good. But you've got lights. You don't want the cheese to melt. It needs to be the right temperature. So, it was really fun putting all that together. We ate a lot of cheese after all those shoots.
Nice. Is there a piece of cheese wisdom? There was actually some wisdom in this movie that kind of transcended cheese and kind of applied to life in general. Is there something in particular that is your kind of mantra that you kind of work with no matter whether you're thinking about cheese or not?
A mantra. I don't know about a mantra. I definitely, when I was on set, would always tell our crew, be conscious not to eat too much cheese or you're going to get the cheese sleepies. I think along with that, taking the time to really savor the flavors and to understand understanding where the cheese has come from, I think really helps enhance the experience of eating it. It's I think sometimes, the idea of that milk taste and that cheese taste is so abstracted that you don't always think this came from an animal, a person aged it a specific amount, and kind of knowing more about the process makes you really appreciate, I think, how special each piece of cheese is.
Nice. And what about you, Adam? Is there something you think about?
I think about cheese almost all the time, but I also I think about making impact. But before I even answer that question, I want to back up a little bit. This movie was extremely hard to make, and by hard to make, I mean first just getting people to understand the difference between a cheesemaker and a cheesemonger. The question you asked is a question that we've been asked by almost every potential distributor. The lack of understanding of the amount of different cheese and the amount of different flavors, the understanding that nobody thought that Sarah could actually create 90 minutes about cheese and cheesemongers and make it interesting. Everybody's like, oh, maybe it's an episode, right? But an hour and a half? No way. And so I want to really take a beat and say, Sarah and her team unequivocally made cheese the actual stars of the movie. Sorry, so I don't want to belabor this, but this movie was incredibly difficult to make. And I think Sarah and her team made a most beautiful film. I am
Thank
personally, you're welcome. Well, you did. It's incredible. I also want to highlight that my first time coming to Wisconsin will be for this film festival. So shout out Milwaukee for getting me into Wisconsin for the first time in my life. And the mantra, the simple mantra, in honor of Yoda, right? No try, do, right? Do your best, right? My simple code in life is love and tolerance, and my simple goal in life is to make an impact. I try every day to make the world within my grasp a better place. I've come to realize that this world that is on a fire, the only way to make the world a better place is to focus on the world within your grasp. And I think Sarah did an incredible job helping me show the world how a delicious bite of cheese and a hug can really make a difference.
Sarah Jo Wolanski is the filmmaker of the documentary The Big Cheese. Adam Moskowitz appears in the film. They both spoke with WUWM's Maayan Silver. You can find more information about all of the films you heard about today, including showtimes and dates, at WUWM.com. Milwaukee Film is a financial supporter of WUWM. That's Lake Effect for today. I'm Excurette Nunez. Audrey Nowakowski, Joy Powers, and Sam Woods join me in producing Lake Effect each week, with help from Graham Thomas. WUWM's Eric Vonfellow, Maria Peralta Ariano, is also helping out Lake Effect this month. Becky Mortensen is our executive producer, and Emily Files helps edit the show. We also heard from Susan Bentz, Maayan Silver, and Jimmy Gutierrez from the WUWM news team this week. Jason Reevy is our studio engineer, Valeria Navarro Villegas is our digital operations manager, and Trapper Shep wrote our theme music. If you missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. And if you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Join us again on Monday at noon for a look at the turmoil the UW system is facing after the president was recently fired. Plus, we'll tell you about the new restaurants that have opened in Milwaukee recently. Thanks so much for joining us today on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.